Thank you, Bud. Thank you, and thank you all for joining us this morning. Thank you, our members that are here. We appreciate your support and coming out this morning. Today, I just want to touch on, we've got a limited amount of time, and I'm going to share with Joe Knilans here from the Office of Advocacy, but I think what we're going to talk about is politics, policy, and the impact on small business. And I know whenever anybody talks about politics, everybody kind of, oh, that stuff again, you know, but it is really, really important. And one of the things I hope you'll take away today is just how important it is for small business owners to be involved in the political process. We try to get them involved in the policy end of things, and I'll explain that in a minute. But first, a little bit about NFIB's history. We were formed in 1943, and so 77 years ago, if you're doing the math, in San Mateo, California. And the mission really was to give smaller businesses a seat at the table, basically. The founder said, you know, he looked around, he saw big labor and big business doing all the policy making, having all the impact, all the influence, and he said, you know, where's small business? So we started selling memberships up and down the streets of San Mateo, California in 1943, and now it's grown into an organization of about 300,000 nationwide, and we have almost 9,000 members right here in Wisconsin. So it's a big organization on behalf of small business. Our mission is pretty simple. It's to promote and protect the right of our members to own, operate, and grow their business. Simple as that. And as let me pass these around if I could. Take those and pass them around. We do it on all three levels. What you get with NFIB is state advocacy. You get federal advocacy in Washington, D.C. We have an office there. We have a half dozen lobbyists there. We have our media headquarters is there. Our legal center is there. So what we bring to the advocacy business is state involvement, federal involvement. As Bud indicated, we have a legal center that acts as your advocate in the courts. Our legal center filed over 53 briefs in 2018 where we participated in various types of court cases to make sure that small business rights are being protected at the court level, at the legal level. As I indicated, our member profile, if you look at that sheet there, most of our members, overwhelming majority, I think it's around, 60% have fewer than 5 employees. About 80-some% have fewer than 20. So it's clearly the Main Street mom and pop type businesses that we work for. Our administrative structure is pretty simple. We have policy, politics, legal, and it all comes down to grassroots. We have what we call area action councils. We have 7 of those around the state, and those are like local chapters of NFIB, so we can involve people directly where they live, so to speak, where they operate their business. We have a leadership council. That's kind of like our state board of directors. Bud Steyer is a member of that. He attends those meetings. They generally meet in Madison. Not monthly, he said monthly, about quarterly. We try to get that group together, and that's a statewide group of about 23 or 24 members from throughout Wisconsin and representing all types of businesses. Then, of course, we have a national board of directors. We have a political action committee board, and they're responsible for all of our political agenda, our political programming. They're the ones who set that agenda. They're the ones who make the decisions about which candidates deserve the support of Wisconsin's small business community. And then we have our administrative office is located in Nashville, Tennessee. And that's a story all of its own, why we're in Nashville, but I love going to Nashville. It's a great place to have your headquarters. And then, as I mentioned, we have an office in Washington, D.C. And what makes us a little more unique and different than a lot of organizations, we have offices in all 50 states. So we have a 50-state network of small business owners, which really gives us a tremendous database for research, but it also gives us a tremendous network on all the various issues and what's going on across this country. Our structure, as I said, we really dwell a lot on the grassroots. That's what NFIB is all about. Because we do have so many members that cut across all types of businesses, we can bring a lot of voice, a big voice, to legislative decision making. And that's what we really concentrate on a good deal, how to get our members more deeply involved, or at least involved, in both the political agenda as well as the policy agenda. And to that end, we have, as I mentioned earlier, our media department, our senior, we have one person for several states, but she is devoted just to bringing the small business message to the public in general. So we have the media, and then we have political. And I think it's very important to understand how we operate politically as well as from a policy standpoint. But politically, as I indicated, we have what we call a PAC board, and they make their decisions based on several criteria with regard to endorsements. Voting record, we actually use a voting record to kind of set the tone, so to speak. That is the primary thing that drives our endorsements, is how they vote. You know, they come back home, they come back to Main Street, and they say, well, you know, I support small business. Then you look at their voting record and say, well, you know, maybe not so much. So we kind of put their feet to the fire, so to speak. So if they have the voting record, we support them. We're nonpartisan, Democrat, Republican. You vote right, we'll consider you for support of small business. Then we factor in things like leadership. You know, do they fight for small business? Do they speak up for small business? Do they sign on to legislation that would benefit small business on our key issues? Is the district competitive? Will we really make a difference in that district? Is that race really going to kind of, can we have an impact? And does it make any difference? You know, some districts, it doesn't make any difference. They're all going to go one political direction or the other. We don't waste our members' resources going into races that really are already decided basically before people vote. So we look at that. We look at the small business, the candidate himself, the small business owner. Is it a small business owner running? Whether it's an incumbent or a challenger. If they're a small business owner, that's great. Makes my job a whole lot easier, working with people that know something about small business. And also, if they're an NFIB member, that's even greater. You know? So we love to support the candidates who have some tie to small business. It's just really, really, really important. And that's just the way we do it throughout the organization, state or federal. It really is driven by the performance of the candidate. If it's a challenger and they don't have a voting record, then they're interviewed on our issues that are important to small business. You know, we all know that small business is a tremendous economic driver. Half of our workforce is employed by small business. Small business is the third greatest economic power in the world. Small business produces 2.5 times more innovations per employee than big business. 2 out of every 3 Americans had their first real job experience with small business. So when it comes to working, playing, and getting the items and services we need, small businesses are really the significant part of our everyday life. They are the economic engine. I know you hear this data all the time, but I think it's really worth repeating whenever we talk about politics and policy. 1 in 4 of us work at a small business, half of family members or a friend who works at a small business. 7 out of 10 people say they purchase goods and services from small business. So economically, we're big business. I mean, big economically. So with that in mind, we have to look back and see how this kind of economic power can help drive policy and politics, whether it's a state candidate or a federal candidate. So let's just step back here and take a look at what the legislature has been doing, or not doing, as the case may be. And some of us like that even better when they're not doing anything. And that's all out of respect for Joe. He was a member of the legislature at one time, so he knows I respect all of the people that run for public office. It's a tremendous sacrifice, and they deserve our respect regardless of whether we agree with them or not. So let's kind of recap real quickly here. As of the end of February, there were about 1,800 bills introduced. There are about 103 so far that were enacted into law, and that doesn't count the 60 that the governor signed a week or two ago in one day, 60 new laws in one day. The governor has vetoed 12 laws. NFIB has registered an interest in 27 Assembly bills, 19 Senate bills, for a total of about 46 to 50 bills we're closely monitoring or have indicated an interest in those bills. We don't do it by ourselves. This is very important. We are very coalition-driven. We work with several other organizations to get on issues where we have a common interest. I'm a member of the Tourism Federation, for example. We work on tourism issues on a regular basis, whether it's school start dates or whether it's investing more in our tourism industry. We think that's critically important. So we work with our friends in the Tourism Federation. I'm currently president of the Wisconsin Civil Justice Council, which is made up of 16, of the board of directors, I should say, is 16 statewide organizations. And we work on issues that related to our civil justice system to prevent frivolous lawsuits and trying to get our civil justice system fair and more predictable for everybody. So what did we get done? Not much. This was a very, very unusual session. It started out with a bang when we have a new governor and he proposed his budget, and there was lots and lots of things in the budget that we didn't like, frankly, and I'll get to that in a minute. It was a very slow session. Bills, I think last week there were like 30-some bills introduced, and we're really kind of at the end at this point. But as far as enactment's concerned, here's one of them that we worked on, deals with ex-offenders. There's a legislation now where the state will issue what they call a certificate of qualified employment to ex-offenders, nonviolent ex-offenders. And once they earn that certificate, they can come in and it sort of gives them an entry to getting a job, basically. We're trying to reduce recidivism in our institutions. We're trying to make sure that anybody that wants a second chance can get a second chance. So these are individuals that will be certified, I hate to say certified safe, but at least they will have a certain certification that they may be a good employee, and that employers who are looking for workers might want to consider those individuals. So the state has stepped in trying to address, in a small way, the worker shortage. Broadband, there's legislation that's been approved that we supported that will help expand broadband to some of our rural areas in the state and improve the quality of it in other areas. Basically, it will exempt some of these broadband providers from the personal property tax, which the big companies already have that. So this is really just leveling the playing field. If you have any children, the legislature also now will allow young people, children under 12 or 12 and older, I think it is actually, they can sell lemonade now on private property. So they couldn't do it before without a permit and licensing and liability insurance and all the rest of it. So now, if you want to go sell some lemonade, set up a stand by the roadside on private property, you can do it without a license, without any kind of fee. Just let them do it. So
is there a limit to what they can make?
There's some oversight with regard to safety, food safety.
Oh, I didn't know how much money.
Oh, I don't think so. I hope not. I think that would be a shame. Let them go, right? They're entrepreneurs. They're trying to, make some money here. And we like it because it's a potential member, right? We got them coming through our door. That's all good. The other area the legislature has really gone off on is toward apprenticeships. Years ago, apprenticeships were pretty much the domain of big labor unions. They weren't really part of any kind of a strategy to address the worker shortage. The legislature in the last two sessions now is trying to make apprenticeships available more to smaller employers, giving them some tax credits. If you hire one, there are grants setting up these programs. So it's just another area where the legislature is stepping in and trying to do something about the worker shortage. And believe me, if any of you have any ideas, talk to me after we're through here, because it's really a challenge. I know all of you are experiencing it NFIB has the same problem. We're trying to get people to sell memberships for us and have other positions that are open. So we're all in this together. You probably know this, the summer campground regulatory reform package. Congratulations to the Campground Owners Association. They got two, I think, pretty significant bills enacted into law. One that requires the Department of Safety and Professional Services to revise their building code and establish new standards for recreational camps. I don't know if any of you here, but I know that a lot of campground owners testified in Madison in support of this legislation, and it was signed into law by Governor Evers. The other one that was signed into law will be 2019 Act 131, another victory for the campground owners. It allows electronic record keeping for health records at recreational and educational camps. So sort of modernize the way that you're required to maintain records. So that's two victories. That's pretty good. Now we go to defense. You know, you always get a little offense, you know, just like football, you get offense and defense. This is sort of the negative, and sometimes it's easier to kill legislation than it is to pass legislation. A couple sessions ago, we had 12-ish bills dealing with legal reform that we didn't like. And we were fortunate we killed every one of them. It wasn't easy, but we got rid of every one of them. They would have expanded lawsuits into every small business owner in the state, regardless of what type of business. In a session or two ago, there was a regulatory reform bill that we helped kill because it would have, it would have eliminated our Small Business Regulatory Review Board and or made it very insignificant in the regulation review process. And believe it or not, this legislation would have given the Department of Revenue a major role in developing regulations. The Department of Revenue, is that the department you want, you know, looking at all your regulations? I don't think so. Well, we can thank our friends in the state Senate. They managed to put that one away. I mentioned earlier the budget bill that Governor Evers introduced earlier last year. We opposed a good deal of that budget bill. It did increase taxes by nearly $1 billion. It increased spending by almost $7 billion. It reinstated the prevailing wage law. It repealed the right to work law, increased the minimum wage to $15 an hour. It would have increased unemployment insurance benefit amounts from $370 to over $400 per week. It eliminated the 1-week waiting period that's now required before you can be eligible for UI benefits. It repealed work search requirements for people receiving unemployment insurance, and it expanded Family and Medical Leave Act to include small business. So all of those things were deleted from the budget, so we're grateful for that. So legislation that was introduced that did not pass, again, this is good stuff because it failed. One was predictable scheduling. Have you heard of that, any of you? Predictable scheduling, where you have to give employees a certain notice on their hours and when they can time off and all kinds of, like 2 weeks written notice before you do a schedule for employees. They have to have a written notice. That failed. It'll be back. Paid leave for medical and family leave. We're going to see a lot of this, especially in the current environment with the coronavirus. But there was legislation introduced, did not pass, that would have mandated paid employee family and medical leave act, medical leave. And of course, minimum wage. You've got legislation that did not pass that would increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. And it would also allow local minimum wage rates. So if the state says the minimum wage is $10 an hour, if Stevens Point wanted to make it $20 an hour, they could do it. We got rid of this a few years ago. We had legislation passed, I think it was during the Doyle administration, where we prohibited a local minimum wage because even Governor Doyle understood that you can't have a patchwork of minimum wage rates where you drive from one town, it could be a town, into a village and you have a different minimum wage rate. I mean, how are you going to do that? But they still want to do it. So we continue to work on that issue. So unfinished business. How am I doing? I don't want to take too much Joe's time here. We didn't get, one of the top tax issue at the state level for NFIB is eliminate that personal property tax. We took a bite out of it last session. We knocked it down by about $77 million. We eliminated a schedule. We had another $44 million late in the session that would be eliminated. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed that. We took another bite. We wanted that 45 because then we come back next session and we only have a $200 million problem instead of now we still have over a $200 million problem. You all know how many of you like the personal property tax? I mean, it's really it's a grab bag of exemptions and it's very confusing. It raises very little money. Even local governments don't like it. But it's there, and we haven't been able to get rid of that darn thing yet. Bidding procedures, we're trying to get more smaller businesses involved in selling to the state. But probably one of the major leftover issues from this session, and we're going to hear a lot about this one, is transportation. How do we fund road maintenance, building highways, improving our bridges? How do we pay for it? Do we raise the gas tax, which is, 32 cents a gallon right now, I believe? Or do we implement tolling? You want to pay every time you get on the highway? You want to pay a toll? Or they've got this idea that they call vehicle miles traveled. So you would pay based on the number of miles that you drive. You would register your miles every year. 12 months later, you would have to re-register your miles, and you'd be charged an assessment for the number of miles that you drive. Registration fee went up a bit this last session. The governor wanted to increase truck fees, which include panel trucks and smaller trucks, by over 27%, because there's this feeling that the trucks, really the heavy trucks especially, are wearing out our roads, so they should pay more. I don't know. Our members have not embraced any of these. They feel, when we've surveyed our members, and all of our legislative policy comes from all of you, we survey our members to determine how they feel, and that is the program that we take to Madison in the Congress of the United States. I can't take a position. If I don't like the gas tax, so what? It's what our members say. And that's what drives everything we do from a policy perspective in the Congress and in Madison. Our members have rejected the gas tax increase. They've rejected tolling. Do I have to say they hate the mileage-driven tax? Registration fees, a little softer rejection, but spending. Have we really gotten a handle on how we spend transportation dollars? Well, we have the same firms, the same construction firms, over and over again with little or no competition being bid on these major projects. Some of the costs, they under budgeted for, 3 or 4 years, you probably follow this, by, I think it was $16 billion, under budgeted, because they come in with one proposal, one bid, and then by the time they get to it, because some of these things are like 5, 6 years in advance when they're bidding these contracts, and they get to it, and the cost is up here, and the state pays it. It's not rebid, it's not relet, it's all got to pay for it, got to pay for this stuff. So we think, and there's support for this, I think, there's some audits done, the Transportation Department is not doing a very good job with the money they have. You know, for many years, they were taking money from the general fund and putting it into taking it from the transportation fund and putting it in the general fund. 1.3 billion between 2013 and 16 went from transportation to the general fund. You know, they can't do that anymore, but it did create a hole. It created some problems with financing some of these construction projects that have been, on the table for quite some time. So now they're trying to catch up. And the roads have gotten worse in some cases. In other cases, maybe not so much. Maybe we need to spend more efficiently and not always look at the revenue side of the ledger. Let's look at the spending side as well at the same time. But let's fix our roads. The tolling issue, I can tell you this, I believe the tolling issue is going to come bubbling up to the top next January, And they're going to start with bridges. They're going to say, if you want to go across this bridge, you're going to have to pay the toll to get across that bridge. And the reason that the advocates for tolling want to do that, obviously, they can play the safety card. So there'll be less resistance to saying, well, if you want a safe bridge, you're going to have to pay a toll. We got to fix them. So that's where it's going to start. And then it moves on to they'll get into the technology and how easy it is now to toll roads. It's not just throwing a few quarters into a can next to the highway. It's all done electronically now. So the ease of collecting that money, guess what? It's going to come in pretty nicely, isn't it? And the spending will go this way. So tolling is very much on the legislative agenda as we look into the 2021 session of the legislature. And I have to tell you, the vehicle mileage tax, or vehicle mileage traveled issue, is also being seriously looked at. Some states have done that, at least on a pilot basis. So we have to be very vigilant and keep an eye on those. Late in the session, there was a legislation introduced that would create a clearinghouse of information for small business, where you go to one site on the internet and get all your licensing, all of this information that you might need, questions and so on. I'm not even sure what it's going to look like. Bidding up, how to get involved in the state's procurement process, all that sort of thing. That legislation is probably dead. I mean, since the Assembly is not going to meet again, perhaps in May they might come back, but the Senate only has one floor day scheduled now in March. We'll see if that happens. The other issue that's emerging that we got to keep an eye on is personal data security, because guess what? That comes back to lawsuits again. A lot of this personal data security breaches end up in court. And so we want to make sure that small business owners are not, that they won't become victims when there is a security breach, that they aren't the subject of a lawsuit. So the legislation that was introduced late in the session would have created a private cause of action. That means that an employee, a vendor, a customer could file a lawsuit against the business where they feel that breach occurred. So we got to keep an eye on personal data security. We're all concerned about it, but we want to make sure that it's all done right and make sure that this data is secure, but that we're not creating a whole new venue of lawsuits that will come with it. Worker classification, that deals with independent contractors, that'll be very much part of the next session. We're always watching for the expansion of the sales tax into services that are currently exempt. NFIB is supporting closing what they call the dark store loophole, which allows big box retailers to protest, file appeals of their assessments based on vacant stores. What this does essentially is it shifts their tax liability to Main Street businesses and homeowners because they're winning because of a court case. Remember, Bud talked about the courts. Because of a court case in 2008 that allows these assessments to be based on vacant stores. So, and I'm simplifying a bit, it's a little more complicated than that, but as most assessments are. But the dark store loophole was not closed, and it's costing local governments millions of dollars just in legal fees. And guess where they get their money? Local governments. We all know where they get their money. Taxpayers. So it's a two-edged sword. We got to get that loophole closed. And there is bipartisan support for it. So unfinished business for the campgrounds. Licensing process for volunteer doctors, reducing paperwork. Great job. I mean, the hearings were held. I know the campground owners were all there. 5-0 passage as amended. Legislature didn't take it up. It passed actually it did. I believe it passed the Assembly, but it's in the Senate now. And as I said, they have one day that they have scheduled for a floor period, so that's the last hope for that legislation. Another bill that passed the Assembly deals with red tape for volunteer nurses. Obviously, the health and safety of campers is very important. And this legislation came out of committee in the Assembly, was messaged to the Senate, didn't pass so far. Allowing DATCAP to waive annual inspections, not more than 2 out of every 3 years at their discretion. They feel the camp has exhibited managerial control of public health hazards. So a little flexibility here. That also came out of committee, but did not pass. So that's leftover business coming at us. So, all right, let me really briefly here, and I don't want to take your time, but okay. We got to get to politics, right? Because we all love politics, right? You know, don't we? The money, the advertising, the robocalls, all the mail in your mailbox. We all love it, you know. Let's get to that. As I said earlier, as Bud indicated, we have a Supreme Court race, and we're going to help you out with that a little bit. This is a guide to the Supreme Court. If you could help me pass those around. It will have records, the cases, and this is to illustrate really how important the Supreme Court and our judicial system is. It does have an impact on your business, and the cases that are cited in that brochure all impact business. Not necessarily small business every turn of the corner, but it does impact business. So pay attention to our judicial system. When there's an election for a judge, find out how they feel about a lot of issues. Very, very important. And then, of course, there's also an election on May 12th in the 7th Congressional District, another very important election. That will happen May 12th, and whoever wins will be on the ballot again in November. So you get kind of a twofer in that race. So political clout of NFIB, or political clout of small business, comes from all of you. It's the masses. It's the diversity of our business community. Who would you most prefer to represent your community or your constituency in an elected office? 44% said a small business owner. 44%. You know the next one is? Number 2 is a union representative, 9%. That's quite a gap, 44 to 9%. 4% said the CEO of a large corporation. So you can see the value of your involvement and your participation in the political side of public policy. Just think about how sensible laws and regulations would be if they were made by people who know how to own and operate a small business or a campground. Boy, things would be a lot simpler, right? So I would encourage you to get involved in the political process at some level. NFIB provides resources for candidates and for our members in terms of how they can help their employees with knowledge about the candidates. Obviously, becoming a candidate is the ultimate price. It's the ultimate activism. It's the ultimate involvement. But there's lots of other ways to do it to it. You can volunteer. You can make candidate contributions, endorsements, letter to the editor. You can host a candidate event, engage social media, but most important, of course, vote, because it does matter. All these actions, all these kind of things will help move public policy in the right direction. So let me just say congratulations to the Campground Owners Association, a great show. Congratulations on the work that you did in the Capitol this last session. And I wish all of you a warm summer, good weather, right? And of course, all the prosperity we can coming your direction, and of course, good health. So thank you all for being here today, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe now. Joe.
So I'll make mine quick. You guys got the candy, you ate the candy. My name's Joe Knilans, as Bill had mentioned, and Bud. I used to be a state legislator, so I worked with Bill on legislation to help small business, and then was actually given an award, I think, from NFIB for that. I think I still have it at home. But Bill used to make a comment that my family was so big that we were a small business, because I have 14 brothers and sisters. So what we do in the Office of Advocacy is we're SBA, Office of Advocacy, pull the SBA out because we're independent. We just use them for paychecks and office locations. So what the Office of Advocacy does It's kind of what Bill does, except take the politics out of it, because I have to be apolitical on this because I'm working for the federal government. But what we do is we advocate for small businesses that are struggling with federal regulations. And a lot of the regulations you'll find at the state level that Bill fights against, some of those have a skeleton of federal regulations that have an impact on small business too. We also try to get information in on regulations so when they make decisions on these regulations that they can make the correct decision with a voice from small business. We have a news we send out every month, an e-newsletter that talks about the regulations coming up, proposed regulations, and gives you an opportunity to put a public comment on that so that you as a small business can voice how this regulation is going to positively or negatively affect your business. We do that. I send those out once a month. If you give me your business card, I can put you on my list and you'll receive it once a month. Some of the things that we like to talk about, or I like to talk about, is when I was with the state, I was with Nancy Mistel, and we did the Office of Advocacy. And one of the questions I had, or statements I had, in the state of Wisconsin, we regulate the size of the holes in Swiss cheese. So as business owners, not in the cheese industry, you'd think that's kind of ridiculous and it's over regulation. But the cheese industry has already built that regulation into their process, and it also determines the quality of that Swiss cheese. Size of the hole, age of the cheese. So you want to make sure your quality stays good. But we had legislators that were willing to take it out because when they did their review process, they thought it was ridiculous, not knowing the impact it would have in the cheese industry. So once the cheese industry spoke up, they said, no, leave that there. And the point of that statement, or the point of this, is that small businesses can tell legislators how best to do regulation because it impacts them. You know, when Bill talked about a lot of legislators could be small business owners, they understand the impact of small business. If you go out to DC, and those legislators, a lot of them are lawyers or accountants, and they have no idea of what goes on back in the state on small business until they get complaints at their office. So our office, one of our missions, is to reach out and let businesses know what's coming down the pike. Now, in 2017, the president, when he was elected, he signed 2 executive orders. One was a 2-for-1, and Bud kind of mentioned that. And the 2-for-1, what that was is each agency, before they wrote one more regulation, they had to remove 2 off their books. It couldn't be 2 small ones and put up a big one. No, it had to be neutral. So the impact, the economic impact of that big one coming in, you had to remove 2, 3, 4 regulations to equal the economic impact of that regulation that's being put in, which was huge. When I took this position in November of 17, I went out there and I was talking to some of the regulators, and they said that's had a huge impact because it slowed everything down. He said, we actually have time now to read these regulations when they come to us, and we can make decisions on how to get this information out, where before it was just boom, 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 boom under the prior administration. So with this administration, it's made a huge difference. The second executive order, which affected small business, was he mandated that each agency come up with a person that would look at their regulations and find existing regulations that could be changed, or could be changed, or get input. So that's where our office comes in. We go out, we do seminars like this, and we have an opportunity to hear from small business owners, say, hey, this regulation is really impacting me. Can you do something about it, or can you get information for me on it? We can do that. We can also answer questions for you. If you've got questions on a certain regulation, we can get an answer for you. An example, Congressman Stiles' office from down southwest Wisconsin contacted me about a constituent that had a business, small business, restaurant. He did not have waitresses or waiters. He just had over the counter, but they put a tip jar out there because everybody wanted to tip him. So they put the tip jar out there, and what he would do is every 3 months he'd pull that money in, send it, pay taxes on it, and then distribute it to his employees. Well, the Department of Labor stopped in there and was going to nail him with a $16,000 fine because he was breaking their laws or regulations. So the congressman's office contacted me. I reached out to our staff. We have lawyers that deal with each agency back in DC. She looked into it. She goes, well, there was a change in this regulation in the spring, And obviously, they're not following that change. So she sent me back the link, because we can't give legal advice, sent me back the link and said, this is who you want to talk to. So I forwarded that off to the congressman's office. They forwarded it off to the business owner, and apparently it was taken care of because the congressman hasn't heard anything more on it. So it's an example of how we can help. We also write letters on federal regulations if they have a negative impact. So if you come with us with a negative impact of a regulation, and we look at it and say, yeah, we agree with you totally, but the agency doesn't change it, and you sue them in court, we can come and file a brief on your behalf saying that this is a negative impact on small business. We are truly independent from the federal government, where we advocate against each agency. A couple of things that are coming up now. Predictive scheduling that Bill mentioned. I'm the rural affairs advocate, so I'm all over the country. I was up in Maine, and some hotel operators came up and talked to me about this. And they said, this is a state thing that they're trying to push through. It's going to have a huge impact. In Maine, what they were looking at is if you didn't give them the notice and they didn't show up, you'd still have to pay them, because you didn't give them the notice of what their scheduling was going to be. That's the predictive scheduling, and it's hitting every state. So you have to be vigilant with Bill and with your legislators that this is not good for small business, not good at all. The second thing is the impact on the coronavirus. I've been in a couple other meetings here, seminars, and I was asking the question of those campground owners, are you seeing an impact of the coronavirus yet? A lot of them say we're booked solid, but I talked to a couple more and they feel, well, this could be something that's going to come up and bite us. So I'm going to send a letter to Lori, and she's going to send it out to you guys in an email to, if you see an uptick on cancellations because of the coronavirus, we want to hear about it because we're doing a study on it. Our economic team is doing a study on the impact of the coronavirus on small business. So you'll be seeing that from Lori maybe sometime next week or the week after, and we want to hear what the impact, if you guys are seeing an impact. The other thing is campground owners, OSHA is changing their regulations in their SABRIFA board, which is a board for small business owners that we set up. Bud Steyer is going to be on the board representing campground owners. And what this new OSHA agreement is they're looking to regulate tree trimming. So if you trim your own trees at your campground, you could be susceptible to following OSHA rules and training and everything else for somebody who trims trees on your campground. So the government hasn't decided what a tree is yet. Is a tree this big? Is a tree this big? Once they make that decision, and then those rules will start coming out. So Bud is on that board, and he will be representing campground owners and talking about the impact on them. So, the question is, are campground golf courses, are they exempt or what? Because a lot of the big tree trimming companies are pushing this because they want to prevent the fly-by-night guys coming in and getting hurt, with their employees getting hurt, and then they're on workman's comp, and it's bad for the industry. But it's the unintended consequence that Bud had mentioned earlier, where you pass legislation and the impact is a year or 2 years later. And what we're trying to do is get a voice in for small business before they get to that point, so that the impact is not as bad and you're prepared for it. So those are some of the four things. And the other thing that Bud talked about earlier was the age for the labor issues. And that's an OSHA issue too, where if you're between 16 and 18, you can't run a lawnmower, you can't run a weed whacker, you can't do a lot of things that campground owners would hire these young kids to learn their first job and learn things, but you can't hire them because they can't do these things. When they can do it at home, they can drive. My son's driving the riding lawnmower at 12, but you can't drive them out here in the campground and make money for it. So that's an issue that is still pending back in DC. OSHA is pushing back against it, but labor has been talking to them. So we'll see what happens on that. And then I think that's it for the issues. I'm sure there's a lot more, but for campground issues, that was some of the pressing things that I've heard. You guys have any questions? Yeah.
I don't know the number of this issue, but I hear on the radio about the docks The land.
That's a state issue where,
The land is owned by someone, I don't.
there's a lawsuit with the DNR. Bill, are you,
That's,
I mean, it's more private ownership probably than business,
It is
but,
like the lake docks, right?
yeah.
it deals with flowage lakes.
Flowage.
Yeah, and it's because the utilities own that
I didn't know who owned the land,
land
I didn't
that's
know.
now underwater.
Yes.
But the utilities own that, so I don't know where this is coming from, but there's a legislation that would clarify the use of the private property owner over that land, even though they don't own the land.
Well, you don't own a lake either.
No, but this goes back, see, and it's just flowage lakes, it's not other lakes, it's just flowage
I
lakes.
didn't know where that was coming from.
Yeah, it's just
I used to
flowage.
hear the
It's
radio,
that,
that's how-
those are the ones utilities kind of created in many ways.
Yeah.
That's where they start, I didn't know where it all started.
That's, I don't remember where they built it.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing too is FEMA, with a lot of campground owners are on lakefronts and rivers, river edges, and a lot of them were told you can build in this floodplain because there's nothing else we can use it for, and you want the river view, you want the access. Well, now they're coming back. FEMA is raising their floodplain levels, and it's affecting campgrounds, which can't collect from FEMA, but yet you guys are caught in it. And some of these county officials come out and saying, you got to put 2 feet of fill in there to take those trailers, those campsites out of floodplain. Well, that's ridiculous because you're losing a natural floodplain when the campground owners can pull those trailers out within 24-hour notice, get them out of there for an emergency, and then you can allow that to flood. It's not going to cost FEMA more money down the river. But it's an issue that when I was with the state, I was struggling with this, and it's something we're still struggling with today. So that's another issue, federal issue with FEMA that's coming up. So, question?
Two things. Bill, if you wanted to join NFIB, how do you do that? What's it cost?
A couple ways, you can go online, if you're comfortable with that, or you can just call our office, okay, you can join through our office as well. We do have sales representatives.
Is there a fee for joining, just asking?
There is a fee? Yeah.
I'm just asking.
Yeah, there's a fee, sure. Entrepreneurs.
Trying to be for a hobby, right?
What kind of fee?
The average dues in Wisconsin is right around $300, as I recall, so. But, you know, our dues are flexible. One of the things Wilson Hunters doing along with the organization is your resources should not prevent you from participating in these legislative decision makings that can put you out of business or keep you in business. So they're flexible. It's up to you, basically.
And Joe, I'm sorry, I didn't catch you. Bill probably said it, or Bud probably said it at the beginning. I know you're with NFIB. Joe, you are.
I'm with the Office of Advocacy. So that's a federal office, and we advocate for small businesses with federal regulations. We also deal with the trade, where the new trade agreements came up. The USMCA, we did our trade roundtable with the old NAFTA in the country. And I've talked to a lot of farmers, dairy farmers, and they're positive on the USMCA. Some of the cheesemakers too. The cheesemakers say that they've got some brokers already in Canada. They're waiting for this to be settled so that they can start selling cheese in Canada. So those are some positives of those trade agreements. I have a folder here that's got some information on the Office of Advocacy. If you want it, it's got my contact information in it. I got 10 of them, so some of the business owners want to share them or something like that, I can give them to you. But one there and one there? Just one? Okay.